The phone call came on a Thursday afternoon, the kind of day that feels ordinary until it isn't. I was tightening bolts on a client's motorcycle when my phone buzzed. Mom's voice sounded too bright, too rehearsed. Claire. Honey, great news. We sold the mountain cabin. For a second, my wrench froze midair. You. What? I asked, though. I already knew what she'd said. We sold the cabin, she repeated cheerfully like it was a coupon deal at the grocery store. Greg found a buyer and the timing couldn't be better. Casey's wedding is next month and this will help with the expenses. My throat went dry. That cabin wasn't yours to sell, I said slowly, each word feeling heavier than the last. It was part of Grandpa's trust. She sighed long and theatrical. Oh, that old paperwork again. Greg checked with a lawyer. Apparently there were issues with the signatures, so technically it's not valid anymore. The world tilted. You can't just decide that, Mom. Don't be dramatic, Claire. Casey's wedding is important. It's her big moment and this family needs to show up properly. I swallowed hard, tasting metal in disbelief. So you sold my inheritance. Silence stretched for a moment, then came her clipped reply. You're so ungrateful sometimes. Grandpa would have wanted to help his family. My voice cracked. He was my family. She laughed lightly, that brittle sound that always came before she said something cruel. You wouldn't even use that cabin. You spend your life buried in grease and engines. At least this way it goes to something beautiful. I hung up before I could scream. My hand shook around the phone grease mixing with sweat. The cabin wasn't just wood and nails. It was every Sunday morning coffee with Grandpa, every story he told me about integrity, every lesson about fixing what others would throw away. I turned toward the key rack on the wall. The old brass cabin key still hung there dull from years of use. My chest tightened as I realized something final had just broken something no tool could repair. They hadn't just sold property. They'd sold the last piece of him I had left and called it love. I grew up in a garage that smelled like gasoline and old stories. My grandfather, Ray Whitman, wasn't just a man who built machines. He built discipline. When I was 10, he handed me a wrench and said, if you can fix an engine, you can fix almost anything. While other kids watched cartoons, I learned how to align pistons and polish chrome until it gleamed like morning sun. The first time I got a motor running on my own, he didn't cheer. He just smiled proud but calm, like he knew I was meant for this. Keep your tools clean and your heart cleaner, he'd say. That was his gospel. Grandpa's garage was our church, oil-stained floors, wooden workbenches lined with tools hung in perfect order. On Sundays, we'd drive his old '68 Mustang up to the mountain cabin deep in the Rockies. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours, wood walls, stone fireplace, and a view that made the world go silent. Those were the only times I ever saw him rest. When he passed from a sudden heart attack, I was 24. The funeral was small. Mom looked more bored than broken. She whispered to Greg, her yoga instructor turned fiancé, while I stood alone at the casket gripping a piece of metal from our last project together. After the service, the lawyer read the will. Grandpa left everything personal, his garage, the Mustang, and the cabin to me, but locked in a trust until I turned 30. He'd said it was for protection, I know your mother. He'd joked once, half smiling. Better safe than sorry. He was right. For 6 years, I honored that promise. I visited the cabin twice a year, kept the garage in order, and treated every bolt and nut like sacred relics. Mom, though, saw it differently. That garage is a junkyard, she said once. You could turn that space into something useful, like a studio. Greg backed her up always with his fake, calm voice. Your mom's right, Claire. You can't live in the past forever. But the past was all I had left of Grandpa, the only man who'd ever believed in me without conditions. I still remember his hands calloused but steady, showing me how to listen to the hum of a good engine. When you know its rhythm, he said, you'll know its soul. He was talking about motors, but I think he meant people too. Looking back, he must have sensed how fragile trust could be, how easily love gets traded for control. He left me more than machines. He left me principles, respect, precision, and pride. So when Mom called years later to tell me she'd sold that cabin, it wasn't just about property. It was about betrayal of everything he stood for. And as I stood in the same garage that used to echo with his laughter, I knew one thing for sure: he'd prepared me for this moment. He'd taught me how to fix what others break, and this time what was broken wasn't metal. It was family. Mom married Greg Simmons exactly 8 months after Grandpa's funeral. I didn't even know she'd been dating him until she handed me the invitation with a rehearsed smile. "He makes me feel young again," she said, brushing invisible dust off her designer dress. Greg was 10 years younger, tan from the gym, and the kind of man who looked at mirrors more than people. I shook his hand at the wedding reception and he squeezed mine just a little too tight. "Heard you're the mechanic," he said. "That's cute." His daughter Casey, 12 at the time, wore a flower crown and an expression of pure disdain. "You smell like oil," she told me before turning away. It was the beginning of something I didn't yet have words for, a quiet erasure. Within a year, the house I grew up in didn't look like home. Grandpa's wood paneling was gone, replaced by cold gray paint. His leather recliner disappeared, traded for sleek white furniture that looked like it belonged in a showroom. Even the framed photo of him in his garage vanished from the mantel. When I asked Mom where it went, she said, "Oh, Greg thought it clashed with the new aesthetic." She said it like she was talking about wallpaper, not her dead father. The garage became Greg's project next. "We'll turn it into a gym," he announced one Saturday, voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Claire can move her tools somewhere else." Mom nodded, sipping her smoothie. I stared at the doorway where Grandpa used to lean while giving me advice about torque ratios and patience. "The garage stays," I said. Greg's smile didn't reach his eyes. "It's just a room, sweetheart." But it wasn't. It was history. It was memory. And it was mine. After that day, he kept the door locked whenever I wasn't home. My toolbox went missing once later, found in the backyard, rusted from the rain. Casey laughed when I confronted her, flipping her blonde hair. "Maybe Grandpa's ghost is just cleaning up your junk," she said. Mom didn't scold her. She just told me to pick my battles. I was 26, then still naive enough to think that keeping the peace meant keeping the family. But peace built on silence is just surrender with prettier words. Greg started investing in flashy things: sports cars, designer suits, private golf club memberships. Mom followed his lead, obsessed with appearances. They became the couple everyone envied and quietly pitied, perfect smiles hiding empty eyes. Casey became their crown jewel etiquette classes. Ski trips, designer clothes. Every time I came home from work, she'd smirk and say, "Still fixing old engines? How charming." I learned to stay quiet to keep my world small: the garage, the Mustang, the memory of Grandpa's laugh. But each visit home felt colder, like walking through a museum of everything I'd lost. The day Greg replaced Grandpa's tool rack with a mirror, I stood there staring at my reflection, wondering when exactly I'd stopped being family and started being a burden. That was when I realized something I didn't want to admit. Mom didn't just move on. She erased us. The shift didn't happen overnight. It crept in, quiet as dust. One morning, Greg started rearranging the living room for better flow, and by summer, the family photos that once filled the walls were replaced by abstract art he claimed was investment pieces. He said it with that salesman grin, smooth and empty. Mom beamed beside him like she'd won a prize. I tried to ignore it at first, tried to convince myself that maybe change was harmless. But every time I stepped into that house, it felt less like home and more like a showroom built to impress strangers. The manipulation was subtle at first. Greg would say things like, "You're so talented, Claire, but it's a shame your skills don't make real money." Or Mom would sigh over dinner and mention how Casey's grades were exceptional, how she was so driven, how she could see her becoming someone important. Then she'd glance at me and add, "Maybe you could help Casey learn a few practical things, like changing a tire." It was never about helping. It was about reminding me where I stood below. They called it motivation. It felt like slow humiliation. Casey's transformation was Greg's masterpiece. Designer boots, ski lessons, etiquette classes, whatever she wanted, she got. "She's the future of this family," Mom said once while polishing the silver Greg had bought. I'd just come in from the garage, oil on my hands, exhaustion in my bones. "You could have the same life if you wanted," Mom added, "if you stopped clinging to the past. The past built this family," I said quietly. She didn't answer. Later, I found out Greg had been selling Grandpa's motorcycles one by one. When I confronted Mom, she brushed me off. "We're just decluttering. Those things take up space." There were thousands, I said, voice shaking. They were Grandpa's legacy. He's gone, Claire, she snapped. You can't live in that garage forever. I didn't argue. I couldn't. I was still trying to believe there was a version of her that wouldn't betray me. Hope is a dangerous thing. It makes you excuse the cracks until the whole structure collapses. The final straw came when Greg changed the locks to the garage for insurance purposes. I came home from work one evening and couldn't get in. Through the window, I saw men moving my boxes. It's for your own good, Greg said when I confronted him. That stuff's just clutter. We're streamlining. You're selling it, I said. He smiled. I'm optimizing. I wanted to scream, but Mom stepped between us. Claire, don't make a scene. Greg knows what he's doing. He's selling what's not his. I said, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. The air smelled like betrayal, sweet, clean, and final. I stopped visiting after that. Every call from Mom felt rehearsed. Every I love you came with a request for money or patience. When I asked about Grandpa's cabin, she changed the subject. Deep down, I knew something was brewing, something ugly and irreversible. Still, a part of me hoped they'd stop before crossing the line completely. I should have known better. Toxic people don't stop when they get what they want. They stop when there's nothing left to take. And I was about to find out just how much they were willing to steal. I was in the middle of a late-night shift at the auto shop when my phone buzzed. Mom's name lit up the screen, followed by a message that read, "Call me sweetheart." Big news. I almost ignored it. Big news from Mom usually meant new debt or new drama. Still, I wiped my hands and called. Her voice came through sugary and giddy. "Claire, you'll never guess. Casey's engaged to Andrew Dalton. The Daltons, honey, the construction dynasty." I blinked, staring at the grease-streaked floor. "Congratulations," I said flatly, reaching for my coffee. "That's great." "Oh, it's more than great," she gushed. "They're planning the wedding at the Summit Club, can you believe it? Full orchestra, over 400 guests. It's going to be magical." Her tone softened just slightly the way it always did before a blow. "Of course it's going to be a little expensive, but Greg and I figured it out." My stomach clenched. "What do you mean you figured it out?" "Well," she said, dragging out the word, "we've had an offer on the mountain cabin. It's just sitting there collecting dust. This way it'll go towards something meaningful family." I nearly dropped my coffee. "You can't sell the cabin." "Claire," she said with a sigh, as if I were a stubborn child, "the paperwork on that trust was never properly notarized. Greg's lawyer found some issues, so technically it falls under my authority. That's not how trusts work, Mom. Grandpa left that to me. You're always so defensive," she said, her patience thinning. "This is for Casey's future. Don't be selfish." I laughed bitterly. "Selfish? You're stealing from me. Don't use that word," she snapped. "You don't even use the cabin. What would you do with it anyway?" "Fix the roof. Host your little mechanic friends." Her tone turned sharp cold. "Be reasonable. You're single, childless, always covered in oil. Casey's wedding is her chance at happiness. You should be proud to help." "Help," I said, voice trembling. "You mean fund it. I mean be supportive," she said smoothly. "That's what families do." "Families don't lie about legal documents," I whispered. There was a pause. Then her final dagger. "Maybe, if you weren't so attached to that old man's junk, you'd understand how to move on." I hung up. My hands were shaking so hard, the phone almost slipped. For a moment, the garage spun around me. I could still smell the mix of metal and oil, the scent of every lesson Grandpa ever taught me about honesty, about legacy, about worth. They were selling it all for chandeliers and table linens. I looked at the framed photo of Grandpa above my workbench. His eyes, steady and kind, seemed to say what I already knew. "Keep your eyes open, kiddo." I grabbed my laptop and started digging through old emails, old files, anything from his lawyer, anything that could prove the trust was still intact. I didn't know it yet, but that night would be the start of the war. For days, I tried to reason with them. I called, emailed, even drove to their house once, but every attempt ended the same way, with me standing in their polished marble foyer feeling like an intruder. Mom would talk in that slow, patronizing tone she used when she wanted to sound calm. "Claire, you're overreacting. You don't understand how the world works. Greg's handling everything. Greg would stand behind her arms folded, smiling like a man who'd already won. It's for the family, he'd say. Your grandfather would have wanted that cabin to bring people together. I'd stare at him, wondering if he believed his own lies. Casey floated in and out of the conversation, busy choosing flower arrangements and custom invitations, never once looking me in the eye. You'll come to the wedding, right? She'd say, breezily, as if nothing was wrong. It's going to be perfect. The word perfect made me nauseous. I stopped calling. Every time the phone rang, my chest tightened, expecting another blow. The next one came by mail, a formal notice stating the cabin's pending sale, signed by Mom and Greg as authorized representatives. I crumpled it in my hands and sat on the garage floor until the light faded. For the first time in years, I cried not loud, but the quiet kind that comes from realizing the people you love don't love you back the same way. That night, I drove to the old house parking in front of the garage that used to be mine. The padlock glinted under the porch light. Through the dusty window, I could see the outline of the Mustang half-covered, abandoned. The air smelled faintly of oil memory and heartbreak. I broke the lock with a crowbar, the sound echoing through the night like a gunshot. Inside, everything was scattered tools, missing parts, stripped boxes labeled donations. I found one of Grandpa's work gloves on the floor, stiff with age. I pressed it to my face and whispered, "I'm sorry, Grandpa. I should have protected this sooner." When I stepped outside, the wind hit hard, cold enough to sting. My reflection in the car window startled me, eyes red, jaw tight, hands trembling but steady. For the first time, I didn't feel like the broken one. I felt awake. Betrayal, I realized, doesn't just destroy trust, it builds clarity. It strips everything fake until all that's left is truth. And the truth was simple. My mother had chosen greed. Greg had chosen control, and Casey didn't even see the difference. The next morning, I called in sick to work and sat at my kitchen table with a notebook. On the first line, I wrote, "They sold what wasn't theirs." On the next, "Find proof." The words looked small but powerful. I didn't know where to start yet, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let them erase Grandpa's legacy without a fight. Not this time. The next morning, I called the only person I could trust, Hayden Brooks, my grandfather's old attorney. His voice came through steady slow, with the kind of calm that only comes from decades of dealing with chaos. "Claire, I wondered when I'd hear from you," he said after I explained what happened. "Your grandfather was meticulous. He left everything airtight. Mom said the trust wasn't notarized properly," I told him. "That it's invalid." He laughed softly, not unkindly. "Ray, Whitman, invalid paperwork. I'd sooner believe the sun forgot to rise." That laugh gave me hope. He asked me to come to his office the next day to bring anything I had. Emails, letters, bank notices, anything with her or Greg's name on it. I didn't sleep that night. I went through every file, every receipt I'd ever kept. At 2 a.m, I found something in email from years ago. Grandpa had forwarded me a message with the subject line, "Finalized trust, confirmed." Attached was a PDF with his signature, Hayden's witness mark, and the notary seal. I opened it with shaking hands. It was real. It was valid. They'd lied. The next morning, Hayden looked over the file and nodded. "Your instincts were right. The trust is binding. What they're doing is illegal." He leaned back, eyes narrowing. "And if they've already sold property under it, that's fraud." The word hung in the air, heavy and electric. "What do we do?" I asked. "First, we find the money. They didn't sell that cabin for cash. They funneled it somewhere." He made a few calls, and within hours, he'd found something. "There's a pattern here," he said, scrolling through transaction logs on his computer. 11 motorcycle sales in the last 2 years. The funds moved from Greg's business account to your mother's personal one, then straight to a wedding planner in Aspen. I clenched my jaw. So they used Grandpa's bikes to fund Casey's wedding. "That's just the start," he said. "They also transferred trust funds to a joint account last month. They're covering tracks, but not well." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "They forged documents, Claire. I can see digital inconsistencies in the PDF signatures. They faked my old notary's mark." I felt a rush of cold fury. "They made it look like you said it wasn't valid." "Exactly," he said. "It's calculated but sloppy. That's good for us. I didn't realize I was gripping the arm of the chair until I felt the leather creak under my fingers. Can we stop them? We can do more than that, he said. We can expose them. He handed me a folder labeled Emergency Injunction Procedure. If we file this, the court will freeze all assets under the trust immediately. But we'll need proof transaction records communication witnesses. I nodded. I can get those. How? He asked, curious. Greg's careless, I said. He uses a shared email account for his fitness business. I've seen him send invoices from it before. If he kept digital records of those bike sales, they're there. Hayden studied me for a moment, then smiled. Your grandfather would be proud. You've got his stubbornness. That night, I went home and powered up my laptop. I remembered how Greg always bragged about his secure passwords, his birth year, and initials. I tried GS 1971. It worked on the first try. My screen filled with invoices, transfers, buyer receipts, all dated after Grandpa's death. I started downloading everything, my heart pounding in my ears. For hours, I combed through evidence photos of bikes, price lists, even shipping manifests. It wasn't just greed, it was premeditated theft. Near midnight, I found a file named cabinsale.pending.docx. My chest went tight. The document included forged signatures from me and Hayden granting them permission to sell. I stared at it numb. That was the moment the last piece of hope I'd held for them disintegrated. This wasn't family. This was a con. I emailed everything to Hayden's subject line, proof of fraud. His reply came within minutes, excellent work. Come in tomorrow. We'll file for the injunction. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but strangely calm. Grandpa used to say, you can't rebuild something until it's completely broken. Maybe that was true. My family was broken beyond repair, but now at least I had the tools to rebuild the truth. The morning after I sent the evidence, I woke up with a strange calmness, like a storm had passed and left everything sharp and cold. Hayden called just after 8. Good news, he said. The judge approved an emergency injunction. The sale of the cabin is frozen until further notice. I didn't smile. Not yet. It wasn't victory. It was the first brick in a wall I still had to build. He suggested we dig deeper. If we can trace where every dollar went, we'll have leverage. The fraud charges will stick harder when we show motive and gain. I knew exactly who could help Julia Monroe, my friend from the motorcycle shop now working in cybersecurity. Julia was 29, smart as hell with a sharp sense of justice that matched mine. When I told her what happened, she didn't even blink. Send me the files, she said. If they left digital footprints, I'll find them. That night, we sat in her apartment surrounded by screens glowing with spreadsheets, receipts, and email threads. They didn't even bother to hide it, she said, disgusted. Look at this! Greg transferred the sale proceeds to a shell company under his name, then used those funds for personal improvements. Translation, your sister's wedding. How much? I asked quietly. Over $800,000 in assets liquidated. Bikes, tools, even spare engines. He sold Grandpa's life, I whispered. Piece by piece. Julia's fingers flew across the keyboard. We can prove it. Every sale, every transfer. I sat beside her watching the lines of numbers that represented betrayal. They think I'll stay quiet, I said. They think I'll play the obedient daughter. Julia smirked. Then let's ruin their script. 2 days later, Hayden filed for a full fraud investigation. Subpoenas went out to every auction house, every collector who'd purchased a bike. It was slow, methodical work, but satisfying. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting. I was fighting back. Mom called that week pretending everything was fine. Claire, we wanted to invite you to a dress fitting. It'd mean a lot to Casey. I almost laughed. Is that before or after the hearing? There was silence. Then her brittle voice cracked. What hearing? You'll find out soon enough, I said and hung up. That night, I sat in the garage, the one I'd reclaimed after Greg's lock mysteriously broke again. The Mustang sat under a tarp, half restored, gleaming faintly under the light. I ran my hands along the hood. You'd like this, Grandpa, I whispered. I'm fixing the family just like you taught me, starting with the broken parts. My phone buzzed. Julia had sent a new file, found something her text read. I opened it and froze. It was a PDF of forged trust paperwork identical to the one Mom had shown me over the phone. But this version still had its metadata. It was created on Greg's laptop. He hadn't even bothered to change the author name. That was the final piece. I printed everything and slid it into a thick folder labeled Truth. Hayden's words echoed in my head. Truth wins, but it needs evidence. I had both now. I spent the rest of the night cleaning the Mustang's engine, the rhythmic sound of tools grounding me. Justice, like restoration, wasn't about speed. It was about precision. And I was done being quiet. They'd taken everything they could touch, but what was coming next would remind them that I'd inherited something far more dangerous than property. I'd inherited clarity. The day of the meeting felt eerily calm, like the air before a thunderstorm. Hayden had arranged for everyone to gather in his downtown office, Mom, Greg, and Casey included. They thought it was a discussion about misunderstandings. They had no idea it was a reckoning. I arrived early, my evidence folder in hand, the kind of quiet confidence that doesn't come from anger, but from knowing you're right. Hayden greeted me with a reassuring nod. "You ready?" he asked. More than ever, I said. At 10 sharp, the glass doors opened. Mom entered first, wearing a navy blue power suit and pearls, her reasonable mother uniform. Greg followed his tan, sharper than ever, a smugness that didn't fit the room. Casey trailed behind, scrolling her phone, her expression bored. "Claire," Mom said sweetly, "I'm glad you're here. We can resolve this like adults." "That's the plan," I said, keeping my voice level. Hayden gestured to the conference table. "Please have a seat." They sat still, unaware of the trap about to spring. He began professionally sliding a set of papers forward. "Mrs. Simmons, Mr. Simmons, Ms. Whitman. This meeting concerns the Whitman Trust established by the late Raymond Whitman. You've both made claims of administrative authority over the assets. Those claims are false." Greg leaned back. "We had legal consultation." "No," Hayden said evenly. "You had forgery." He clicked his remote. The large screen lit up with scanned images, signatures, emails, and bank transfers. "You've been liquidating trust assets without authorization for over 2 years." Mom's face blanched. "This must be a mistake." "Really?" I asked. "Then explain why the funds from Grandpa's motorcycles ended up paying for Casey's wedding planner and Greg's golf club dues." Casey's head snapped up. "What?" Greg shot me a glare. "You don't understand. I understand perfectly," I cut in. "You used Grandpa's legacy as your personal ATM." Hayden spoke again, his tone calm but surgical. "We've confirmed 11 motorcycle sales totaling $812,000, all traced to your accounts. Additionally, we have proof of forged documentation claiming the trust was invalid." He clicked again, revealing a document on screen, cabin sale pending.docx. My heart pounded as the digital signature line glowed. "This file was created on your laptop, Mr. Simmons." Greg's jaw tightened. "That's circumstantial. It's metadata," Hayden replied coolly. "And the FBI agrees. They've already been notified." The silence in the room was thick. Mom finally found her voice trembling. "Claire, we didn't mean to hurt you. We just wanted to secure Casey's future." "By erasing mine?" I asked. "By selling the only things that mattered to Grandpa?" "You wouldn't understand," she said, her tone sharpening. "You hide in garages. You fix old junk. We were building a family legacy." "You were buying one," I said quietly. "And now you've lost it." Casey stood suddenly, eyes wide. "Wait, this can't be real. Mom, did you really use that money?" Mom reached for her hand. "Honey, it was for you, your future with Andrew." "My future." Casey's voice cracked. "Andrew's mother already pulled the funding for the venue. She said she doesn't want their family name tied to anything illegal." Greg's facade finally cracked. "That's ridiculous." Hayden slid another document forward. "It's not. The court has issued a freeze on all your accounts. The mountain cabin and remaining trust assets are now under judicial protection. Any attempt to access them will be treated as criminal interference." Greg slammed his fist on the table, his composure gone. "You can't do this." "You did it to yourselves," I said, voice steady. Mom's eyes filled with tears. "Claire, please, we can fix this. We're family." I stood. You stopped being family the moment you lied about Grandpa's will. She reached for me, but I stepped back. You taught me something I'll never forget, I said. Love without respect is just manipulation. You don't get to rewrite what you destroyed. Hayden gathered the papers calmly. Mrs. Simmons. Mr. Simmons, you'll both receive official notice of the investigation and court hearing within 48 hours. Until then, I suggest you cooperate. They rose in stunned silence. Casey lingered, her mascara running. I didn't know, Claire, she whispered. For the first time, I almost believed her. Maybe not, I said, but you chose not to see it. She nodded, ashamed. As they left the office, I felt a strange stillness. I thought justice would feel like triumph, but it didn't. It felt like gravity, heavy, inevitable. Hayden turned to me. You did good, Claire. Most people would have given up. I shook my head. I didn't do this to win. I did it to make things right. As I walked outside, the autumn air hit my face crisp and cool. I looked up at the skyline thinking of Grandpa's words, "Keep your heart clean." For the first time in years, I finally understood what he meant. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't need applause. It just needs to be done. News travels fast in small towns, especially when it involves scandal. Within a week, every local paper and gossip site carried the same headline, "Prominent couple under investigation for estate fraud." Mom and Greg's perfect suburban facade cracked like thin glass. Their friends stopped calling. Greg's gym revoked his membership pending review. Casey's fiancé, Andrew, released a statement through his family's PR team, cold and surgical. The engagement between Andrew Dalton and Casey Simmons has been mutually dissolved. It wasn't mutual. He'd ghosted her, then blocked her number. The Daltons wanted distance, no photos, no association, no reminder that their son's almost wife was funded by stolen money. The fallout was immediate. Mom's designer friends pretended not to see her at the market. Greg's business partners cut him out of their shared venture. One of the buyers who'd purchased Grandpa's bikes demanded refunds after seeing the headlines claiming fraud. When the court froze their accounts, the house of luxury they'd built collapsed overnight. Mom tried calling me dozens of times. I didn't answer. Each voicemail was a new tone, pleading angry, desperate, apologetic. "Claire, this isn't fair," she said, once her voice cracking. "We're family. Another time I did it for Casey, not for me." Then finally, a whisper. "I don't know what to do." I listened to that one twice before deleting it. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like the natural end of something rotten. Justice has a sound, and sometimes it's just silence from the people who used to talk the loudest. A week later, I drove by their house. The for sale sign was already up. The front yard where Greg used to show off his imported cars was empty, just faint tire marks on the driveway. Through the living room window, I could see moving boxes stacked high, half labeled, half forgotten. I parked across the street, engine idling, and for a second I almost went up to the door. But then I saw them. Mom sitting on the floor, surrounded by boxes, shoulders slumped. Greg, pacing with a phone pressed to his ear, face red with frustration. They looked small, the kind of small that comes when arrogance finally collapses into consequence. I didn't feel satisfaction, just a quiet ache like watching a slow-motion car crash you saw coming miles away. I rolled down my window and let the cool air in. The scent of rain and pine drifted through sharp and clean. Somewhere deep down, I imagined Grandpa would have said, "Let the storm do the work, kiddo," and it had. The storm had stripped them of everything they'd built on lies. I started the engine again, ready to leave, but then Casey came out of the house carrying a box of clothes. She looked different, no makeup, no sparkle, just tired. When she saw my car, she froze. For a moment, our eyes met. There was no hatred there, only something fragile. Shame, maybe. She mouthed something, "I'm sorry," then looked away. I nodded once before driving off. That night I called Hayden. "It's over," I said quietly. He hesitated. "You sound disappointed?" "I'm not," I said. "Just tired." He understood. "You did what had to be done. You honored your grandfather and destroyed what was left of my family," I said. "They destroyed it," he corrected. "You just turned the lights on." I sat in silence for a long time after we hung up. Sometimes justice doesn't heal. It just cleans the wound so it can finally scar over. The next morning I went to the cabin. The locks had been changed under the court order, but the key Grandpa gave me years ago still fit. I opened the door, and the smell hit me, wood dust, coffee, and faint traces of engine grease from when he used to tinker on old parts in the living room. I ran my fingers along the wall, tracing the grooves of the logs. Outside, the mountains stood silent and eternal. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was standing in the ruins of something. I felt like I was standing on the foundation of what was left and what was real. It was almost a year before I heard her voice again in person. Mom showed up unannounced one Sunday afternoon, standing on my porch like a stranger who'd lost her map. She looked smaller, her once polished hair streaked with gray, her hands trembling around a paper cup of gas station coffee. "Claire," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know where else to go. For a long moment, I just stared at her. Behind her, the autumn trees swayed, gold leaves falling against the cabin's porch, the same cabin she'd once called useless. She stepped forward. "We lost the house. Greg left. Casey's staying with friends. I don't know what to do. I didn't invite her in right away." I let her stand there while silence stretched between us, a silence filled with all the years she hadn't listened. Finally, I said, "You can come inside, but just to talk." Inside, the air smelled of cedar and old memories. She looked around, eyes landing on the photographs of Grandpa, the neatly hung tools, the old Mustang keys resting in a bowl. "You kept everything," she said softly. "He would have liked that." I nodded, not ready to make it easy. She sat down at the table, shoulders sagging. "Claire," she began, her voice shaking. "I know, sorry, doesn't fix anything. I was blind. I let Greg convince me we were doing the right thing. I wanted to be important again. After your father left, after everything, I just wanted someone to see me. So you sold the only person who ever did," I said. Her eyes filled. "I know, and I hate myself for it." I took a deep breath. "Mom, I don't need you to hate yourself. I need you to change." She looked up, desperate. "I will. I've lost everything. Isn't that punishment enough?" "No," I said quietly. "Losing things isn't punishment, it's consequence. Punishment is knowing why it happened." I got up and handed her a framed photo of Grandpa, the one of him smiling next to the Mustang. "He believed in second chances," I said, "but he also believed people have to earn them." She took the photo, her fingers shaking. "Do you think he'd forgive me?" "Eventually," I said, "if you stop lying to me, to yourself." We sat there for a long time, the wind whispering through the trees outside. When she finally stood to leave, she hesitated at the door. "Can I come back sometime?" she asked. I thought about the years of betrayal, the broken trust, the damage she'd caused. "Maybe," I said, "when you can look me in the eye and tell the truth." She nodded slowly. "That's fair." As her car pulled away down the gravel road, I watched from the porch. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a quiet resolve. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't about letting people off the hook. It's about deciding how much space they get in your future. And for now, Mom's space was small. Still, when I walked back inside, I noticed the photo she'd left on the table, the one of Grandpa. She'd wiped the dust from the glass. Maybe that was her first honest act in years. Spring came late to the Rockies that year, slow and deliberate the way healing often is. I spent my days at the cabin rebuilding piece by piece what greed had tried to erase. The smell of oil and pine filled the air again. On the workbench sat the Mustang engine Grandpa and I had started restoring before he died. Each bolt polished, each wire measured, every movement careful. I liked to think he was there in the quiet hum of the mountain wind, in the rhythm of the wrench turning. The court officially closed the case in March. Greg took a plea deal for falsifying documents and avoiding taxes. He avoided jail, but his reputation was done. No gym in the county would hire him. Casey moved back to town after her friends drifted away. I heard she was working part-time at a local cafe. We didn't talk, but one day she sent a short letter. I didn't stop them, but I wish I had. "I'm trying to be better." I believed her. Maybe that was enough. Mom kept her distance, though she sent postcards every few months, simple, remorseful ones. Still sober, still learning. I hope you're okay. I didn't respond, but I didn't throw them away either. They sat tucked in the glove compartment of the Mustang, reminders that forgiveness isn't always loud or final. It's a slow rebuilding, like restoring an engine that's been rusted by neglect. One quiet evening, I drove the Mustang up the winding road to the ridge. The sun was setting behind the peaks, casting gold across the lake. The cabin stood steady against the horizon, stronger than ever. I parked, turned off the engine, and listened to the ticking sound of the cooling metal. That sound, small and steady, felt like peace. Inside, the cabin was warm. The walls still carried the scent of cedar and smoke. On the mantel hung Grandpa's favorite photo, him leaning against the Mustang, hands on his hips, proud and unbothered. Below it, a plaque I'd made read, "Integrity is the only inheritance worth keeping." I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window. For the first time in years, I felt still. Everything they'd tried to take, the garage, the bikes, the cabin, none of it mattered as much as what they couldn't touch. They couldn't steal Grandpa's lessons or the strength he'd built in me. They couldn't rewrite who I became because of him. Outside, a bird landed on the porch railing. The world felt small and complete. I thought about all the people who'd written to me after the story broke other sons' daughters, people betrayed by their families. Some angry, some broken, all searching for justice. It made me realize something simple but powerful. Betrayal may take what you have, but it can never take what you are. Grandpa used to say, "When something's worth fixing, you do it right or you don't do it at all." He meant engines, but I think he meant life too. So I fixed what I could. The truth, the legacy, the part of myself that refused to stay quiet. I stood and walked back to the garage. The Mustang gleamed under the single bulb overhead paint, polished to a mirror shine. I ran my fingers along the hood, whispering, "We did it, Grandpa." "She's running." When I turned the key, the engine roared to life, deep and smooth, just like he'd taught me to make it sound. I took it for a drive down the mountain, the headlights cutting through the dusk. The road was empty, endless, peaceful. At the bend overlooking the valley, I stopped, stepped out, and let the wind hit my face. The stars were starting to appear, faint at first, then bright and bold. They tried to take everything I said softly, but they never understood what they were stealing. I smiled, then not the smile of victory, but of understanding, the kind Grandpa used to wear after fixing something broken, the kind that says, "It works now, it's whole again." As I drove back to the cabin, the headlights caught a glint on the wall, a framed quote Grandpa once kept in his workshop. I'd almost forgotten it until now. "Do right, even when no one's watching." And in that moment I realized he still was.